Hello everyone. I am the storyteller. Tonight, I'll tell you a story soaked in gasoline and whispered warnings, one you'll wish you hadn't heard by the end. It began when Jared, broke and desperate, took a late-night job at a gas station along a dead stretch of Route 66. No customers, no questions, just a paycheck and a graveyard shift. That's what they promised. But when the sun fell below the cracked horizon and the shadows began to stretch long and thin across the desert, he discovered this wasn't just any job, and those weren't just shadows. Relax. Listen to the hum of flickering neon. And find out what happens when you ignore the rules written in gasoline and blood. I've always been a night owl, but even I wasn't prepared for the kind of solitude that comes with working at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I mean it. Amboy, California, a forgotten speck on Route 66 surrounded by miles of desert. The sky is littered with stars you'd only ever see in a planetarium. It sounds romantic, but it's not. There's a heavy stillness out here that clings to you, a quiet that isn't peaceful but oppressive, as if the sand and the wind are whispering secrets to each other that no one else should hear. The job seemed straightforward enough when I found the ad online. Night clerk needed. No experience necessary. Competitive pay. I'd just been laid off and wasn't exactly drowning in opportunities, so I jumped at it. My first clue that this place wasn't ordinary should have been the lack of an interview. They just sent me a confirmation email with the instructions, show up by 10 p.m. Your duties will be explained. The gas station itself is a relic from another time, a squat, battered building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that hums like a dying insect. The pumps are ancient, the kind with spinning dials instead of digital readouts. It's the kind of place that feels like it's been forgotten by the world, and yet it's still standing, as if refusing to let go of whatever history it's clinging to. The owner, a wiry old man named Mr. Grady, didn't stick around long enough for pleasantries. He handed me a set of keys, pointed me to the counter, and muttered, "Don't go snooping around, just do your job." Before I could ask what that entailed, he disappeared into the desert night, his truck kicking up a trail of dust. I thought I could handle it. I'd worked graveyard shifts before, and I figured it would just be me, a pot of stale coffee, and the occasional lost traveler. But something about this place felt off. The way the shadows seemed to stretch just a little too far. The way the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to sync with my heartbeat. And then there was the gas canister. It sat by the pumps, riddled with bullet holes. The metal was rusted and pockmarked. I only noticed it when I went outside to sweep up some sand. When the flashlight beam hit the pooling gas underneath it, words shimmered in the reflection, like heat mirages. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I stepped closer, the words sharpened, each letter etched in shimmering liquid. Rules. It was a list of rules. I didn't know it then, but those rules would be the only thing standing between me and a night I'd never forget. The words in the reflection didn't make any sense at first. They shimmered faintly, shifting slightly as if written on water, refusing to stay still. I crouched down, my knees digging into the cracked asphalt, and angled my flashlight over the pooling gas beneath the bullet-riddled canister. The rules came into focus, and my stomach twisted into a knot. Rule 1. Do not touch the gas canister after 11:13 p.m. Rule 2. If a car pulls in but no one exits, fill the tank without question. Rule 3. Do not look directly into the side mirrors of any vehicle. Rule 4. If you hear whistling from the desert, turn off all lights and hide. Rule 5. Never, under any circumstance, read this list aloud. I felt a cold sweat creep up my spine. A prank, I thought. Someone's idea of a joke. Maybe Mr. Grady was testing me, though I couldn't figure out why an old man would bother with this level of effort. I stood up, brushing dust off my jeans, and glanced around. The desert stretched on, a void in every direction, illuminated only by the sickly yellow glow of the station's flickering lights. The canister groaned as if shifting slightly. I stumbled back, heart pounding. I could have sworn it moved, but when I looked again, it was exactly where it had been. The pool of gas reflected the stars overhead now, the rules gone as though they'd never been there. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. Maybe it was the heat messing with my head. Even at night, the desert clung to its warmth like a jealous lover. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. The gas station's interior was just as eerie as its exterior. Rows of dusty shelves stocked with canned goods and snacks that looked like they'd expired sometime during the last millennium. The counter was scratched and sticky in places, with an ancient cash register that seemed to sigh every time a key was pressed. A single clock hung on the wall, its second hand ticking louder than it had any right to in the oppressive silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by a person I'd have heard them but by the building itself. The walls seemed to lean in slightly, and the humming of the lights felt too synchronized with my breathing, as though the gas station were alive, waiting for something. At 11:10 p.m., a car pulled into the lot. I glanced up from the counter, expecting to see someone step out, but no one did. The car sat there, headlights on, engine idling. Its windows were tinted black, and even under the neon glow I couldn't make out a single detail. I waited for a moment, the seconds ticking by too slowly. My gut told me to stay inside, but my feet didn't listen. The rules they came flooding back. If a car pulls in but no one exits, fill the tank without question. The words echoed in my mind like a mantra I couldn't ignore. Grabbing the pump handle, I stepped out into the night. The air felt thicker now, each breath heavy in my lungs. I walked up to the car, avoiding its side mirrors out of instinct. My hands trembling as I unscrewed the gas cap, the tank gurgled as the fuel flowed in. No movement from the car, no sound but the rhythmic clicking of the pump. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, every instinct screaming that something was wrong, but I didn't dare stop. The rules didn't say what would happen if I didn't follow them, I wasn't about to find out. When the pump clicked off, signaling the tank was full, I screwed the cap back on and stepped away. The car didn't move for a long, agonizing moment. Then, without a sound, it rolled out of the lot and disappeared into the desert night. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had been, my breath fogging in the cold air. My hands were shaking, and for a moment I thought about quitting right then and there. But something held me in place, fear. Curiosity. I couldn't tell. I walked back inside, locking the door behind me again. The clock on the wall read 11:15 p.m., 2 minutes past the time the rules had warned me about. I glanced outside at the canister, half expecting it to have moved. It hadn't, but the pooling gas beneath it shimmered faintly, reflecting nothing but the empty night. I sat down behind the counter, staring at the clock. My shift had barely started, and I already felt like I was losing my mind. I spent the next hour pacing the narrow confines of the gas station, glancing at the clock every few minutes. The rules were etched into my mind now, each one looping like a warning bell. I tried convincing myself that I had imagined the car's eerie stillness or the way the gas shimmered unnaturally, but it was no use. Something was wrong with this place. The desert outside was oppressively quiet, even the usual chorus of nocturnal insects and distant howls seemed muted, as though the world had taken a collective breath and held it. At 12:30 a.m., the bell above the entrance chimed. I froze. I hadn't seen headlights or heard an engine approach. Slowly, I turned toward the door. A man stood there, dressed in a dusty coat and wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. His boots left faint prints on the cracked tile floor, and when he moved, it was with a stiffness that reminded me of an old marionette. "Evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly, his hat tilted slightly as he looked around the station. "Quiet night." Yeah," I stammered, my throat dry. "What can I get you?" He walked to the counter, his boots clicking unnaturally loud in the silence. Up close, I noticed his face was too pale, the skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but I could feel them watching me, dissecting me. "Just gas," he said, sliding a crumpled bill across the counter. I hesitated, something about him set my nerves on edge, but I forced a smile and nodded. Sure thing. Pump 1. The man didn't answer. He just nodded once and turned, heading back outside. I watched him go, his silhouette almost disappearing into the darkness. The bell chimed again as the door swung shut behind him. When I stepped outside, I realized there was no car. I stood there, gas pump in hand, staring at the empty lot. The man was gone, and so was the money he'd handed me. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I looked around, hoping to see taillights or footprints in the dirt. There was nothing. Just me, the gas station, and the canister. The rules. My mind raced back to the rules, trying to remember if there had been one about people walking in without a car. I couldn't remember. My breathing quickened as I fumbled with the pump, staring at the spot where the man had disappeared. I swore I heard faint laughter carried on the wind. I went back inside, locking the door behind me once again. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, hoping for a distraction. No signal, of course. The isolation of the gas station wasn't just physical, it was total. The clock ticked louder now, or maybe I was just imagining it. 12:45 a.m. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me like a weight. I sank into the creaky stool behind the counter, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. Then, from somewhere outside, came the faint sound of whistling. It started low, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder, more insistent. My pulse quickened as I turned toward the windows. The desert outside was pitch black, the faint glow of the station's lights doing little to pierce the darkness. The rules. My mind latched onto them again, desperate for guidance. If you hear whistling from the desert, turn off all lights and hide. I scrambled to my feet, flipping switches and plunging the gas station into darkness. My hands were shaking as I crouched behind the counter, heart hammering in my chest. The whistling grew louder, circling the building, accompanied by the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. I covered my mouth to stifle my breathing, squeezing my eyes shut as if that would make it go away. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. The bell didn't chime, the door didn't open. For a long, agonizing moment, there was silence. Then, a whisper, "You're breaking the rules." I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The voice was low, almost a growl, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The seconds dragged on like hours, and when the footsteps finally faded, I collapsed against the counter, gasping for air. The lights flickered back on, bathing the gas station in their sickly glow. I sat there, shaking as the clock ticked toward 1 a.m. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had a feeling the night was far from over. The gas station's clock ticked toward 1:15 a.m., and though the whistling and footsteps were gone, the unease lingered. My pulse thudded in my ears, and the fluorescent lights above hummed with an almost sinister cadence. Every shadow in the store felt alive, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I was just about to convince myself to stand up when a loud crash shattered the fragile silence. The sound of breaking glass ripped through the night, echoing like a gunshot in the empty station. My head whipped toward the source, the front windows, where shards of glass now littered the tile floor. My heart sank as I realized the center window had been smashed from the outside. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. I grabbed the flashlight from beneath the counter, flicking it on with trembling fingers. Its beam cut through the darkness, casting harsh shadows across the room. I took a tentative step forward, my sneakers crunching over broken glass. Outside, the desert was as black as ink, its emptiness swallowing the weak light spilling from the station. The wind had picked up, rattling the metal sign above the pumps, but there was no sign of anyone or anything near the broken window. As I crouched to examine the shards, I saw it, the gas canister. It sat directly outside the broken window, positioned neatly on the cracked pavement. The bullet holes glinted in the moonlight, and dark liquid oozed from one of the punctures, pooling at its base. But it wasn't gasoline, it was too thick, too dark. It looked more like blood. I scrambled back, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The rules. My mind screamed for me to recall the rules, searching for anything that might explain this. If the gas canister moves, do not approach it, lock all doors and wait. My heart seized. I had already approached it. The canister had been near the pumps earlier, I was sure of it. My body moved on autopilot as I scrambled to lock the front door, pulling down the rusted deadbolt and flipping the sign to closed. I backed away from the door, keeping my eyes locked on the window. The canister hadn't moved, but something about it felt menacing, as if it were watching me. I had to do something, anything, to get a grip on my nerves. I returned to the counter and grabbed the radio, flipping the knob to scan channels. Static hissed through the speakers, occasionally interrupted by faint blips of noise. I had no idea what I was searching for, help, maybe, or just a voice to reassure me I wasn't losing my mind. The static gave way to a whisper, faint and garbled, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of water. I froze, holding the radio closer to my ear. Breaking rules. I dropped the radio, the voice had been low, guttural, and unmistakably inhuman. My breathing hitched as I stared at the radio, its static continuing to hiss mockingly. The bell above the door chimed. My stomach dropped. The door was locked, wasn't it? I turned slowly, the flashlight in my trembling hand. The door was still bolted, but the bell swayed gently as if someone or something had passed through it. My gaze fell to the floor, where a single set of footprints bare, wet, and impossibly large led from the door to the gas canister. I staggered back, gripping the counter for support. The rules. I clung to them like a lifeline, my mind desperately trying to recall what to do next. But the words blurred, slipping through my grasp like sand. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dripped onto the counter. The footprints stopped just outside the broken window, but I had no doubt they would return. The canister sat in the same spot, its dark liquid now seeping toward the gas station's entrance like it had a will of its own. The night wasn't just hostile, it was alive, and it was watching me. The night deepened, each minute dragging like an eternity. The station was unbearably quiet, except for the low hum of the lights overhead and the occasional creak of the old metal sign outside. My hands trembled as I clutched the flashlight, its weak beam darting nervously between the gas canister outside and the door that still, mercifully, held shut. I sank to the floor behind the counter, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. The rules swirled in my head, fragments of them surfacing like debris in a storm. If the gas canister moves, do not approach it, lock all doors and wait. I had locked the door. I had waited. But the canister hadn't moved yet. The thought brought little comfort. I must have dozed off for a moment, my body succumbing to exhaustion despite the terror coursing through my veins. When I blinked awake, something felt wrong. The station was darker than before, the fluorescent lights dimming to a sickly yellow glow. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. And then I saw it. The canister was no longer outside the window. My heart leaped into my throat as I scrambled to my feet, the flashlight beam darting frantically across the cracked pavement. It was gone. I pressed my face against the window, squinting into the darkness, hoping, praying that I had imagined it. A faint metallic scraping sound echoed from somewhere behind the building. The kind of noise that sets your teeth on edge. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The sound grew louder, closer, like nails being dragged across concrete. I backed away from the window, my legs trembling. The rules repeated in my head like a mantra, but they offered no guidance for this. What do you do when the thing you're supposed to avoid is already here? The scraping stopped. A deafening silence followed, so profound that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, slowly, the gas canister rolled into view from the dark hallway that led to the storeroom. I froze. The canister stopped in the middle of the room, its bullet holes glinting faintly in the weak light. The dark liquid that oozed from it formed a slow-moving puddle on the floor, spreading like a stain of malevolence. And then it moved again. The canister tipped slightly to one side, as if something invisible had pushed it, before rolling a few inches closer to me. The puddle of liquid followed, creeping toward my feet. "Stay away," I whispered, though my voice sounded small and pathetic in the oppressive silence. The canister rolled again. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the counter. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering out for a heart-stopping second before reigniting. When the light returned, the canister had stopped moving, but now the dark liquid on the floor had begun to shift. It slithered like a living thing, snaking across the tiles with unnatural purpose. It wasn't heading for me, it was heading for the door. "No," I muttered, my voice cracking. "No, no, no." The liquid pooled at the base of the door, seeping into the cracks like it was searching for something, or someone. My breath came in shallow gasps as I watched it crawl upward, inching toward the lock. The deadbolt began to rattle, the metal vibrating as if struck by invisible hands. I darted forward, my instincts screaming at me to stop whatever was happening. I grabbed the radio off the counter, frantically turning the knob to scan the channels. Static filled the air, punctuated by faint whispers and distorted voices. "Help me!" I shouted into the radio, my voice echoing in the empty station. "Please, someone help me." The static hissed in response, and then a voice cut through, "You broke the rules." My blood ran cold. The voice was low and rasping, filled with an unnatural menace. It wasn't coming from the radio, it was coming from the canister. The voice echoed in my mind long after it had stopped. I stared at the canister, frozen in place, my thoughts scattered. My grip on the flashlight tightened until my knuckles turned white. The liquid had stopped climbing the door and now pooled silently on the floor, dark and motionless, as if it were waiting. The room was deathly silent, except for my shallow breaths and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 3:27 a.m. A few more hours until dawn, but time felt meaningless in the suffocating grip of fear. I moved back toward the counter, my footsteps hesitant and careful. Every creak of the old floorboard sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. My eyes never left the canister. It sat in the middle of the room like a malevolent totem, daring me to approach it. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but it grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from every corner of the room. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was unmistakable, angry, accusing, relentless. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whispers continued, surrounding me, pressing against my skull like invisible hands. They seemed to emanate from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Show yourself." The whispers didn't respond. Instead, the shadows in the corners of the room began to shift. At first I thought it was a trick of the flickering lights, but then I saw them move, dark shapes that slithered and crawled across the walls like living things. They coalesced into vague forms, humanoid but twisted, their limbs elongated and their faces featureless. I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my hands. The shadows moved closer, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by an unseen hand. They reached for me with claw-like fingers, their bodies dissolving and reforming with every step. "Stay away!" I screamed, swinging the flashlight wildly. The beam of light passed through the shadows, scattering them momentarily before they reformed, darker and more solid than before. The whispers grew louder, the voices blending into a cacophony of rage and despair. My heart pounded in my chest as the shadows closed in, their outstretched hands inches from my face. I could feel the cold emanating from them, a bone-deep chill that sapped the strength from my limbs. In a blind panic, I bolted for the storeroom, my only thought to put as much distance between me and the shadows as possible. I slammed the door shut behind me and fumbled for the lock, my fingers trembling. The shadows pounded against the door, the wood groaning under the force of their assault. I backed away, my flashlight illuminating the cluttered shelves of the storeroom. The radio sat on a metal shelf, its static-filled speaker hissing like a snake. I grabbed it, hoping for some kind of answer, some way out of this nightmare. "Please," I whispered into the radio. "Tell me what to do." The static crackled, and then the same voice as before answered. This time it was clear and deliberate. "You broke the rules, Jared. Now you pay the price." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "I didn't. I followed them. I locked the doors. I didn't touch the canister." The voice laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You didn't follow all of them," it said. "You turned off the pump too late, and now they're coming for you." The shadows began to seep under the door, their inky blackness spreading across the floor like spilled oil. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath. I backed into the corner, clutching the radio like a lifeline. The whispers filled the room, drowning out my thoughts, my pleas, my screams. The shadows slithered into the room, filling every crevice, wrapping around shelves and boxes like tendrils of smoke. My flashlight flickered weakly, its beam swallowed by the encroaching darkness. I pressed myself against the cold metal shelves, clutching the radio, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Why is this happening?" I whispered, though I knew no one would answer. The radio in my hand crackled to life again. The voice was softer this time, almost sorrowful. "They always come back. You can't outrun what you've awakened." "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. The static hissed and spat, but no reply came. I gritted my teeth and tried to think, but the cold was seeping into my bones, slowing my thoughts and sapping my strength. Then I noticed something strange about the canister on the monitor in the other room. On the station's security feed, I could see it sitting there, untouched but ominous. Around it, faint figures flickered into view, men in ragged clothes, their faces obscured, their hands holding tools that glinted in the dim light. They moved in unnatural jerks, like a damaged film reel, appearing and disappearing as though caught between frames of reality. They weren't just shadows, they were ghosts. A chilling realization gripped me. The gas station wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, a snare for restless spirits bound by the rules I was now entangled in. Each rule wasn't about order or safety, it was a ritual, a method to keep the station's curse in check. The figures on the screen turned their heads in unison, their eyeless faces staring directly into the camera. My stomach churned as they raised their hands, pointing toward the storeroom, toward me. The door rattled as the whispers intensified, now distinct words, overlapping and fractured. "You owe us, you must pay, you're next." I backed away, stumbling over a stack of boxes. My flashlight rolled out of my hand and spun on the ground, its flickering beam catching something on the floor. I squinted through the haze of fear and saw them, footprints, wet and bloody, leading straight to where I stood. My heart raced as I realized they weren't mine. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the back exit. The shadows clawed at me, their icy tendrils brushing my arms and legs. I reached the door and threw it open, stumbling into the cold desert night. The air was sharp and dry, but it felt like freedom compared to the suffocating grip of the station. I ran toward the highway, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. In the distance, a pair of headlights appeared, growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, desperate for help. The car slowed as it neared, and I saw an old truck, its paint chipped and rusting. Relief flooded me as it pulled to a stop. A man leaned out of the driver's side window, his face obscured by the shadows of the cab. "You all right, buddy?" he asked, his voice gruff but concerned. "Please, you have to help me," I gasped, pointing back at the station. "There's something in there, anything wrong." The man frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked past me. Station's been closed for years, he said slowly. Ain't no one worked there since. Well, since the accident. What accident? I demanded, my voice trembling. But before he could answer, the truck's headlights flickered and went out. The whispers returned, louder now, carried on the wind. The shadows slithered toward me, crossing the desert like living oil slicks. The man in the truck vanished before my eyes, his vehicle dissolving into nothingness. I turned to run, but the ground beneath me gave way. I fell, my screams swallowed by the darkness, the shadows consuming everything. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer outside the gas station. I was back inside, standing behind the counter as if nothing had happened. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights overhead filled the air, and the register beeped softly, waiting for its next transaction. My heart sank as I realized I was trapped, pulled back into the station's cursed grasp. My reflection stared back at me from the blackened window behind the counter, except it wasn't quite me. The figure was dressed in an old, oil-stained uniform that didn't belong to me. Its face was gaunt, hollowed by decades of suffering, and its eyes dark, bottomless void seemed to pierce straight through me. I staggered back, but the reflection didn't move. Instead, it smiled. The radio on the counter crackled to life again, but this time the voice was different. It wasn't the low, raspy tone of the warnings I'd been hearing all night. It was my own voice, distorted and distant, as though coming from a place I couldn't reach. "Welcome to your new shift," it said, the words dripping with cruel amusement. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The radio hissed in response, and the static seemed to bleed into the air around me, distorting the edges of the room. The shadows crept closer, pulling themselves together into shapes, figures I recognized from the grainy security footage. The ghosts of the station's past workers stood before me, their forms flickering like old film reels. One of them stepped forward, a tall man in a tattered uniform. His chest was riddled with bullet holes, and his face was twisted in a grotesque snarl. "You broke the rules," he growled, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "Now you'll take our place." "No," I shouted, backing away. I followed them. I followed every single one. The man's eyes glinted, and he raised a hand to point at the gas canister by the pump. Its surface, slick with pooling gasoline, reflected in the shimmering liquid were scenes I couldn't believe, me spilling gas from the nozzle, leaving the register unattended, ignoring the shadows. The canister had been watching, documenting my every mistake. "You didn't follow them well enough," the ghost hissed, stepping closer. The others joined him, their forms stretching and twisting as they surrounded me. I stumbled, falling to my knees. The ground beneath me began to crack, black tendrils of shadow seeping through the floorboards. They coiled around my wrists and ankles, pulling me down into the station itself. The room spun as the walls closed in, the air thick with the stench of gasoline and decay. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to." The ghosts only laughed, their voices echoing in my ears. "The station doesn't care about intent," the lead ghost snarled. "It only cares about keeping its secrets and its sacrifices." The tendrils tightened, dragging me down into the floor. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was my reflection in the pooling gas, but it wasn't me anymore. It was the man from the register, the one with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. My future. My replacement. The gas station on Route 66 remains as it always has, silent, brooding, and utterly inconspicuous. Travelers pass it by without a second thought, the flickering neon, open 24 hours, sign a lonely beacon in the endless stretch of desert. Those who do stop rarely stay for long. They pump their gas, grab a bag of chips or a soda, and drive off, their tires kicking up dust into the night. But every now and then, someone lingers too long. Someone notices things they shouldn't. Inside the station, the air feels heavier, thick with secrets no one dares to speak. The faint smell of gasoline permeates the air, mingling with the ghostly scent of something older, something darker. The shelves are always stocked, the register always humming, and the pumps never seem to run dry. It's a place frozen in time, eternally waiting. Behind the counter, a new clerk stands watch. His uniform is freshly pressed, his posture stiff and awkward, as though he hasn't quite adjusted to his role. His name tag reads, Jared, but his face, though familiar, is distant, almost hollow. His eyes dart nervously to the windows, his fingers fidgeting with the keys to the register. He doesn't speak much, and when he does, his voice carries an edge of resignation, as though he knows something no one else does. Outside, a car pulls up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver steps out, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a weary expression. She walks into the station, her boots echoing against the linoleum floor. Jared looks up, his face twitching with something between recognition and dread. He doesn't greet her. He doesn't need to. Pump 2, she says, placing a crumpled bill on the counter. Her voice is flat and detached, like she's used to being ignored. Jared nods and rings her up, his hands trembling slightly as he slides her change across the counter. The radio crackles behind him, a faint voice whispering something just out of earshot. Jared stiffens, his eyes darting to the gas canister by the door. Its surface glistens with fresh gasoline, the reflections within swirling like a disturbed pond. The woman doesn't notice. She walks back to her car, oblivious to the way the shadows seem to stretch toward her, eager and hungry. Jared watches her leave, his knuckles white as he grips the edge of the counter. He knows what's coming. He's seen it all before. As the car pulls out of the lot, its taillights fading into the distance, the radio lets out one last burst of static. Jared exhales shakily, his shoulders slumping. He survived another night, but deep down, he knows the station won't let him go. It never does. The camera feed flickers on the security monitor, showing an empty gas station bathed in the pale glow of the neon sign. But if you look closely, if you really pay attention, you might see them, the ghosts of the past, lurking just beyond the light, their faces twisted with rage and despair. They're waiting, always waiting, for the next poor soul to wander into their trap. And Jared? He's just another piece of the puzzle, another pawn in the station's endless game. A game no one ever wins.